I am Walter Hale, 71 years old, and the most important decision of my life happened on a quiet Tuesday morning when I finally chose my own dignity over my own son's comfort. Let me tell you exactly where I was standing when everything changed. I was in the parking lot of the First National Credit Union on Maple Avenue, sitting in my old pickup truck, watching the automatic glass doors slide open and closed in the cold November air. I had a folded piece of paper in my coat pocket. On that paper was a new account number that my son and his wife did not know existed. I had driven there alone, told no one, and I had just done something quiet and irreversible. I had transferred my entire monthly pension, every single dollar of my $4,800 retirement income from 38 years as a high school history teacher, to that new private account. I sat in that truck for a long moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Then I drove home. My name was on 3 items in that house: the doormat, a framed family photo in the hallway, and the deed to the property. Everything else, the furniture, the food in the refrigerator, the streaming subscriptions, the gas in the 2 vehicles parked out front, had been purchased with money that came from my teaching pension. My son knew this. His wife knew this. I was simply the last one to fully accept it. Before I tell you what happened when I walked back through that front door, I want to ask you something. Tell me in the comments below, what city or state are you watching from tonight? And hit that like button if you believe that a parent's love should never be mistaken for a blank check. I moved into my son's spare bedroom 14 months ago. My wife of 41 years, Carol, passed away from a sudden cardiac event on a Sunday afternoon in late September. 1 week after the funeral, my son called me. His voice was soft and careful, the way a person sounds when they have already rehearsed what they want to say. He told me the house was too big for one person. He told me he and his wife had plenty of room. He told me it would be good for all of us. He said the word family 7 times in that single phone call. I counted because I was a history teacher, and counting things was a habit I never shook. I sold my house. I packed 2 suitcases and a box of Carol's photographs. I moved into the spare bedroom and handed my son a debit card tied to my pension account so he could manage the household bills the way he suggested. That was 14 months ago. What I did not fully understand at the time was that the word family, when used 7 times in a single recruiting phone call, is sometimes less of an expression of love and more of a carefully worded business proposal. The spare bedroom was small. It had 1 window that faced the back fence. The closet door had a broken hinge that squealed every time I opened it, and my son had promised to fix it 11 times over 14 months. I kept a small notepad in my nightstand drawer. I am a history teacher. I document things. I had written down every promise, every date, every dollar amount I could recall from the moment I handed over that debit card. By the time I sat in that credit union parking lot last Tuesday morning, my pension had deposited a total of $67,200 into that joint account over 14 months. I had asked my son 3 times in the last year to show me the household budget. The first time he told me he was busy. The second time he handed me a single handwritten page with round numbers that did not add up to any amount, close to $67,200. The third time his wife came into the room, sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and explained with the patient, slightly condescending tone of someone addressing a confused elderly relative, that I did not need to worry about the finances because they were handling everything on my behalf. She told me I should focus on resting and recovering from my grief. She smiled the entire time. I thanked her. I went back to my small room with the squealing closet. That night, I started making calls. I am a retired history teacher, not a forensic accountant, but I spent 38 years teaching young people how to read primary sources, how to find the truth buried inside someone else's version of events, and how to identify the moment when the official story stops matching the evidence. So I did what I taught my students to do. I gathered the evidence. I had online access to the account. I had never been removed because it was originally in my name. I spent 3 evenings at the small desk in my room, going through 22 months of transaction history with a highlighter and a legal pad. The monthly utility bills were there. The groceries were there, but so was a 4-day resort stay in Charleston, South Carolina booked. During the same weekend, my son told me he had a work conference and could not drive me to my cardiologist appointment. So was a recurring monthly charge to a luxury car lease service. So were weekly restaurant charges at a steakhouse downtown that ran between $180 and $340 every single Friday night. The same nights my son told me they were too tired to cook and had left a frozen meal in the microwave for me. So was a $2,800 charge from a jewelry boutique purchased 3 days after my son asked me if I could contribute a little extra toward a surprise anniversary gift for his wife. I had funded the anniversary gift I was invited to contribute to. I had not been invited to the anniversary dinner. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark room for a long time. The squealing closet hinge was the only sound. I thought about Carol. She had always been the one who read people accurately. She had smiled politely at my son's wife for 11 years at every holiday dinner, and on the drive home she would always say quietly, "Walter, that woman is keeping score of everything." I had always told her she was imagining it. I was wrong. Carol was usually right about everything. It was one of the most consistent facts of my adult life. I did not cry that night. I made a list instead. I spent the following week making 3 phone calls I did not tell anyone about. The first was to a retired colleague of mine named Dennis, who had spent 15 years as a bank compliance officer before he taught economics at our school. I described the account activity without using names and asked him what he thought he was looking at. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walter, what you're describing is textbook financial exploitation of an elder dependent. That's not a family disagreement. That's a crime in 47 states." The second call was to an estate attorney named Patricia Bowers, whose office was on the other side of town, far enough away that I was unlikely to run into anyone who knew my family. I made an appointment, drove there alone on a Wednesday morning while my son was at work and his wife was at her yoga class, and I sat in Patricia's office for 90 minutes. She reviewed the account history I had printed and organized. She confirmed what Dennis had told me. She also told me something I had not anticipated. She asked me whether I had signed any documents since moving into the house. I thought carefully. I remembered a single afternoon, about 2 months after I arrived, when my son had placed a thick stack of papers on the kitchen table and explained they were household management documents, utility transfer forms, insurance beneficiary updates. He had walked me through them quickly, pointing to each signature line, and I had signed without reading closely because I trusted my son completely and because I was still numb from Carol's death, and everything felt like it required more mental energy than I had available. Patricia looked at me steadily and asked me to bring those documents to her at my earliest convenience. The third call was to my doctor. I scheduled a full cognitive evaluation for the following Friday. That Friday evaluation was my idea, not anyone else's. I had noticed something over the past several months. Whenever I questioned an expenditure or asked to see a receipt, my son's wife would respond in one of 2 ways. Either she would change the subject by asking me if I had taken my blood pressure medication, implying forgetfulness, or she would glance at my son with an expression I had learned to translate as "here he goes again." I am a history teacher. I know what it looks like when a narrative is being constructed about a person without that person's participation. I wanted a certified, dated, official document in my possession before that narrative had a chance to become useful to anyone. My doctor was a straightforward man who had been my physician for 16 years. He referred me to a certified neuropsychologist for the full evaluation. I sat in a clean office for 3 hours. I answered questions. I recalled word lists. I solved logical sequences. I drew intersecting pentagons and explained abstract proverbs. At the end, the neuropsychologist looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Mr. Hale, your cognitive scores place you in the top quartile for your age group. Your memory and reasoning are functioning exceptionally well." He signed the evaluation report with a raised official seal. I folded it carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of my coat, where it stayed for the next 4 days. On Tuesday morning, before my son and his wife woke up, I drove to the First National Credit Union and opened a private account. I transferred the incoming pension direct deposit to that account. I removed my son's access to the old account entirely. Then I drove home, parked the truck, walked through the front door, sat down at the kitchen table, and poured myself a cup of coffee. My son came downstairs at 8:15. He was wearing a pressed collared shirt, which meant he had an early meeting. He poured himself coffee without looking at me, and then his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up. He read something. He set it down. He picked it up again. He turned to look at me, and his expression had changed completely. He asked me what I had done to the account. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I told him the account was fine. I told him his access had simply been updated. He set his coffee mug down harder than necessary. He told me the direct deposit had not arrived this morning, and he had a car payment processing today. He asked me, with a tone of patient exasperation, usually reserved for explaining traffic laws to a teenager, whether I had accidentally clicked something on my phone that changed my banking settings. I told him it was not an accident. His wife appeared at the bottom of the stairs a moment later, already dressed, holding her phone with the screen facing me. She had pulled up the account page. The balance showed the existing funds, which were modest, and a red notification indicating the scheduled direct deposit had been redirected elsewhere. She set the phone flat on the table in front of me and asked me to explain what I was thinking. I reached into my coat, which was hanging on the chair behind me, and I removed the legal pad I had been filling for several weeks. I opened it to the first page and set it on the table beside her phone. I told them I had been doing some reading. My son pulled out a chair and sat down. His wife remained standing. I began at the top of the first page. I read the date and amount of the Charleston resort booking. I read the monthly luxury car lease charges. I read each Friday steakhouse entry, noting the specific date and amount. I read the jewelry boutique charge and reminded them of the specific conversation in which I had been asked to contribute to a gift I had apparently already fully funded without being informed. I read without raising my voice. I am a history teacher. I spent 38 years presenting documented evidence to rooms full of people who did not always want to hear it. I know how to let the record speak. When I finished reading, the kitchen was very quiet. My son leaned back in his chair. His wife was looking at the wall behind my head. Then my son did something that surprised me slightly, though in retrospect it should not have. He did not apologize. He did not offer an explanation. He changed the subject entirely. He told me he was glad I had brought this up because he and his wife had actually been wanting to talk to me about something important for a while. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his in a gesture of practiced warmth. He told me they had been worried about me. He said my behavior lately had been concerning. He said I had been confused about simple things, misplacing objects, repeating questions I had already asked, becoming agitated over small matters. His wife nodded slowly, her expression shifting into something that resembled grief. She said they had already spoken with a social worker from the county aging services office. She said they had documentation. She said they cared about me deeply, and that what they were considering was entirely for my benefit. I asked her to be specific. She looked at my son. My son looked at her. Then he said they had been advised that a voluntary guardianship arrangement might be in my best interest at this stage of my life. I want you to understand something about that moment. I had been a high school history teacher for 38 years. I had taught units on the internment of Japanese Americans, on the systematic legal disenfranchisement of elderly citizens in various historical periods, on the mechanics of how institutions remove personhood from individuals through paperwork and procedure. I knew exactly what a guardianship arrangement meant. It meant they would control my medical decisions. It would mean they would control my finances. It meant the pension I had earned across 4 decades of standing in front of chalkboards would belong to them, legally and completely, while I would need written permission to make a dentist appointment. I looked at my son. I thought about the first day of kindergarten when he had cried in the parking lot and I had knelt on the cold asphalt and told him he could do anything. I thought about teaching him to drive in an empty church parking lot on Sunday mornings. I thought about sitting in the front row of his college graduation with Carol's hand in mine. I thought about all of it for approximately 4 seconds. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and removed the folded evaluation report. I placed it on the table. I told them they were welcome to review the certified neuropsychological evaluation I had completed the previous Friday at the office of a court-recognized cognitive specialist. I told them it was dated, signed, sealed, and already on file with my attorney. I told them that any legal petition claiming cognitive decline would be walking directly into that document on its first day in court. My son stared at the paper without touching it. His wife picked it up. She read the first paragraph. The careful, sympathetic expression on her face went through several changes in quick succession, like weather moving fast across an open field. She set it back down and told me this was not what it looked like. I told her I was certain it was exactly what it looked like. I told them I had retained an estate attorney named Patricia Bowers, whose office had been in receipt of my documented account activity for the past 6 days. I told them Patricia had already reviewed a set of household documents I had signed approximately 2 months after Carol died. Documents my son had described as utility transfer forms. Patricia had found one page inside that stack that was not a utility form. It was a durable power of attorney document. It had my signature on it. My son's name was listed as the authorized agent. My son's face did not change expression, which told me he already knew exactly which document I was referring to. I told him Patricia had filed a formal revocation of that power of attorney the previous Thursday. It was no longer valid. It had never been properly disclosed to me at the time of signing, which under state law constituted fraudulent inducement, which was not a family disagreement. It was a felony. My daughter-in-law sat down slowly in the chair across from me. I stood up. I picked up my legal pad and my coat. I told him I would be staying in the spare bedroom for exactly 30 more days, which was the notice period stipulated in the informal residency arrangement my attorney had drafted as a protective measure. During those 30 days, I would not be contributing to any household expenses. I told my son he was welcome to speak with my attorney directly if he had any questions about the legal process going forward. I told him Patricia's card was on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. I walked back upstairs to my small room and closed the door behind me. The closet hinge squealed when I opened it to hang up my coat. What I did not know yet, what I would not discover until that same evening, was that the power of attorney document, even though revoked, had already been used. Patricia called me at 6 o'clock that evening. Her voice had the controlled, careful cadence of someone delivering difficult news efficiently. She told me she had spent the afternoon conducting a title search on my property, the house I had sold 14 months ago when I moved in with my son. I told her I had already sold that house. She said she was not referring to that property. She was referring to a small parcel of land in my name in Claremont County, a 3-acre lot I had inherited from my own father, which had been in my family for over 50 years. I had been paying the property taxes on it quietly, every year, for decades. It had a modest assessed value on paper, but it sat adjacent to a state highway interchange that had been under expansion planning for several years, which meant its actual current market value was substantially higher. Patricia told me that 6 weeks ago, using the power of attorney document bearing my signature, my son had entered into a preliminary sales agreement with a land acquisition company. He had agreed to sell that parcel for $210,000, significantly below current market value, to a buyer whose LLC had a registered address that matched a business consulting firm where my son's college roommate was the listed director. He was selling my land to a company connected to his friend, below market value, using a legal authority he had obtained from me through a document I had signed while I was grieving and not reading carefully. Patricia said the word she would use in the formal complaint was conversion. The word the district attorney's office would likely use was elder financial exploitation. The word the state attorney's office would use was fraud. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed and listened to the traffic outside the window. I was not surprised. A history teacher is rarely surprised by the capacity of people to convince themselves that what they want is the same as what is right. I was simply completing the documentation. I asked Patricia what we needed to do before the preliminary sales agreement could be executed. She told me we had a narrow window. The agreement had a 30-day contingency period. We were on day 22. If we filed an emergency injunction and a formal revocation of the power of attorney with the county land records office before day 30, the sale would be legally nullified. She had already drafted both documents. She needed my signature in my presence at the county courthouse the following morning at 8 o'clock. I told her I would be there. I set the phone down and looked at the framed photograph I kept on the narrow nightstand. It was a picture of Carol and me standing on that Claremont County land on a September afternoon 30 years ago. We had driven out there with a thermos of coffee and a blanket and watched the sun go down over the tree line. My father had loved that land. Carol had loved my father. I was not going to allow it to be transferred to a shell company for below market value while I was alive, cognitively intact and fully aware of every detail of the transaction. I did not sleep that night. I graded papers instead, metaphorically. I sat at the small desk and prepared the complete documented record that Patricia would need in the morning. I organized every printout, every screenshot, every note from my legal pad into a clear chronological order. I labeled each section. I cross-referenced each charge against the dates of the specific conversations I could recall. I wrote a clear, factual summary in plain language, the way I used to write study guides for students who needed the complicated story made simple. At the courthouse the following morning, Patricia was already at the filing window when I arrived. We submitted the emergency injunction and the formal power of attorney revocation simultaneously. The clerk stamped both documents at 8:47 inches the morning. The land sale was frozen. The acquisition company was notified by certified legal correspondence before noon. The LLC notified my son. My son called my cell phone 4 times between 12 and 1 o'clock. I did not answer. The 5th call came from a number I did not recognize. I answered it. It was my daughter-in-law. She was not using the patient, slightly condescending voice from the kitchen table. She was using a different voice, smaller and faster, and stripped of its careful management. She told me I was making a catastrophic mistake. She told me my son had done everything for me over the past 14 months, and that I was repaying him with betrayal. She told me the land deal was a legitimate investment opportunity that would have benefited all of us. She told me lawyers cost money I did not need to spend. I told her I had 38 years of classroom experience, and I had learned one thing about people who had done something wrong. The moment they shifted from defending their action to attacking the person who discovered it, the conversation was over. I told her my attorney would be the point of contact going forward. I ended the call. That evening, my son knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it. He was standing in the hallway looking like a person who had spent the afternoon weighing options and arriving at desperation. He asked if we could talk, just the two of us, the way we used to. He said the word dad in a way that was clearly calculated to access something in me. And I want to be honest with you. It almost worked. He was still my son. There was still a version of him I remembered from the church parking lot on Sunday mornings. But then I looked past him at the hallway wall, where a framed print hung that Carol had given me years ago. His wife had moved it from the living room to the hallway sometime in the past year without mentioning it. That small, unremarked rearrangement, the casual confidence of a person who has decided that the things belonging to someone else are available for repositioning, told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation would go. I told him I was happy to talk through my attorney. I closed the door. What followed over the next several days was something Patricia had prepared me for, but that I had not fully anticipated emotionally. My son and his wife hired a lawyer of their own. Their lawyer sent a letter arguing that the power of attorney had been valid at the time of signing, that my son had acted in good faith as my authorized agent, and that the land transaction was a legitimate exercise of his authority. Patricia responded with the documented evidence that the document had been slipped into a stack of utility forms and had not been disclosed as a power of attorney at the time of signing, which negated the informed consent required for validity. Patricia also attached a formal complaint to the state attorney's Elder Financial Exploitation Unit, which opened an official investigation. On the morning of day 30, I packed my 2 suitcases and the box of Carol's photographs. I loaded them into my pickup truck. I carried my coat and my legal pad and the framed photograph from the nightstand. I did not take the frozen meal from the freezer. I drove to a furnished apartment I had rented in a quiet building 3 miles away, a 2-bedroom unit with large windows and a working closet hinge. I had signed the lease the previous week with Patricia present, and the deposit paid from my new private account. I did not leave a note. I want to tell you about what happened 3 weeks later, because it is the part of this story that most clearly answered the question I had been carrying for a long time. The question was this: did my son know exactly what he was doing, or had he convinced himself it was acceptable? Was he a person who understood he was causing harm and did not care? Or was he a person who had simply stopped thinking of my interests as something that counted? 3 weeks after I moved out, my son appeared at my apartment building. He buzzed the intercom. I looked at the small video screen, and I could see him standing in the cold with his collar turned up. He was alone. I buzzed him in. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, a table I had bought myself, with my own money, in a store I had chosen without consulting anyone. He looked around the apartment. He looked at Carol's photographs, which I had arranged on a shelf along the wall. He looked at the large windows. He looked at the working closet through the open bedroom door. He said it looked comfortable. I thanked him. Then he told me the investigation had expanded. He told me the state attorney's office had requested his financial records for the past 2 years. He told me the preliminary sales agreement with the acquisition company had collapsed when the company discovered the injunction and withdrew to avoid association with a pending fraud inquiry. He told me his wife had retained a separate attorney. He said that last part quietly, staring at the table. I understood what it meant. The partnership that had operated with such coordinated efficiency in my spare bedroom was now calculating individual liability. He looked up at me and asked if there was anything I could do to indicate to the investigators that this had been a misunderstanding between family members. I reached into my desk drawer and removed a single piece of paper. It was a printout I had prepared for exactly this conversation. I slid it across the table to him. It was an itemized accounting of every dollar I had tracked from my pension account over 14 months. The total at the bottom of the page was $67,200. Below that, I had written a second number. It represented my calculation of what 14 months of reasonable household contribution would have looked like: 1/3 of utilities, 1/3 of groceries, a fair share of maintenance costs. That number was $14,800. The difference between those two numbers was $52,400. I told my son that I was not in a position to characterize the state's investigation to investigators because I was a documented victim of the conduct they were investigating. I told him my attorney was the appropriate contact. I told him I had nothing further to add to the matter, and I would ask him to leave so I could finish my morning coffee in peace. He sat there for another moment. He looked at Carol's photographs on the shelf. He looked like he wanted to say something that would reset everything, some combination of words that would rearrange the documented record into something more comfortable. There was no such combination. He stood up. He said he was sorry. It was 2 words, unelaborated, offered without eye contact. I accepted them for what they were worth, which was not much, and showed him to the door. The state investigation proceeded over the following months. Patricia advised me throughout and kept the process as manageable as my patience would allow. My son's attorney negotiated an agreement with the Elder Financial Exploitation Unit. My son signed a formal acknowledgement of the misappropriated funds and entered into a structured repayment plan. He did not go to prison, which I had not requested. I am a history teacher, not a prosecutor. His wife resigned from her position at a local nonprofit organization after the financial records from the investigation were referenced in a board inquiry. They sold their house voluntarily to satisfy the repayment terms, which I will note was a house they had purchased using a down payment that, when I traced it back through the account history, originated from a transfer my son had authorized during a period when the power of attorney was active. I did not move back in with them. I did not ask for an apology more elaborate than the 2 words at my kitchen table. I did not explain my feelings at length, or make my son sit through an accounting of his childhood against the ledger of his recent choices. A history teacher knows that the most powerful lesson is the one the student arrives at themselves, sitting alone with the evidence in front of them, without the teacher in the room. I am writing this from the furnished apartment with the large windows. The closet hinge works perfectly. I have Carol's photographs on the shelf, and a cup of dark coffee on the table, and a new morning routine that belongs entirely to me. I drive myself to my cardiologist appointments. I have dinner on Friday evenings with Dennis, my retired banker colleague, at a quiet restaurant where the bill is always split exactly in half. I have re-established contact with 2 old friends I had drifted away from during the 14 months I spent in that spare bedroom, slowly disappearing into someone else's version of my life. I am spending my pension on my own electricity, my own groceries, my own modest pleasures. Last month, I drove out to the Claremont County parcel on a Saturday afternoon. I brought a thermos of coffee. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and looked at the tree line and thought about my father, and about Carol, and about the September afternoon in the photograph on my shelf. The land is still in my name. It will remain in my name. I have updated my will with Patricia's guidance, and it is structured in a way that leaves no ambiguity and no opportunity for a similar misunderstanding. The thing I want to leave you with, the lesson I would have written on the board in room 114 if this had been a unit in my classroom, is this. I did not fail my son by holding him accountable. I failed him earlier, and in a different way, when I confused my love for him with an obligation to absorb whatever he chose to take. A teacher knows the difference between a student who needs more time and a student who has simply decided that the rules do not apply to them. You cannot help the second kind of student by grading their work more leniently. You help them the only way you can ever truly help them, by holding the standard firm and letting them experience the consequence of having ignored it. My son is not a bad person. He is a person who was given a very long time to practice being careless with someone else's resources, and he practiced long enough that it began to feel normal. That is on him. But the long, patient time I gave him to practice that carelessness, that is on me. I finished my coffee. I drove back to town. I stopped at a small hardware store and bought a replacement hinge for a closet door that had been squealing for 14 months. I installed it myself in about 20 minutes. It takes almost nothing to fix a thing that has been broken for a long time, once you finally decide it is worth your attention. If this story says something you needed to hear today, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And leave me a comment, tell me where you are watching from, and tell me if there is someone in your life who has been treating your silence as permission.